While Tom was eating his supper and stealing sugar as opportunity offered, Aunt Polly asked him questions that were full of guile and very deep, for she wanted to trap him into damaging revealments. Like many other simple-hearted souls, it was her pet vanity to believe she was endowed with a talent for dark and mysterious diplomacy, and she loved to contemplate her most transparent devices as marvels of low cunning. Said she, "Tom, it was middling warm in school, weren't it?" "Yes'm." "Powerful warm, weren't it?" "Yes'm." "Did you want to go in a swimming, Tom?" A bit of a scare shot through Tom, a touch of uncomfortable suspicion. He searched Aunt Polly's face, but it told him nothing. So he said, "No'm, well, not very much." The old lady reached out her hand and felt Tom's shirt, and said, "But you ain't too warm now, though." And it flattered her to reflect that she had discovered that the shirt was dry without anybody knowing that that was what she had in her mind. But in spite of her, Tom knew where the wind lay now, so he forestalled what might be the next move. "Some of us pumped on our heads. Mine's damp yet. See?" Aunt Polly was vexed to think she had overlooked that bit of circumstantial evidence and missed a trick. Then she had a new inspiration. "Tom, you didn't have to undo your shirt collar where I sewed it to pump on your head, did you? Unbutton your jacket." The trouble vanished out of Tom's face. He opened his jacket. His shirt collar was securely sewed. "Bother. Well, go along with you. I'd made sure you'd played hooky and been a swimming. But I forgive you, Tom. I reckon you're a kind of a singed cat, as the saying is, better than you look this time." She was half sorry her sagacity had miscarried, and half glad that Tom had stumbled into obedient conduct for once. But Sidney said, "Well, now, if I didn't think you'd sewed his collar with white thread, but it's black. Why, I did sew it with white. Tom!" But Tom did not wait for the rest. As he went out at the door, he said, "Siddy, I'll lick you for that." In a safe place, Tom examined two large needles which were thrust into the lapels of his jacket and had thread bound about them. One needle carried white thread and the other black. He said she'd never noticed if it hadn't been for Sid. "Confound it! Sometimes she sews it with white, and sometimes she sews it with black. I wish to Jiminy she'd stick to one or the other. I can't keep the run of him, but I bet you I'll lamb Sid for that. I'll learn him." He was not the model boy of the village. He knew the model boy very well, though, and loathed him. Within 2 minutes, or even less, he had forgotten all his troubles. Not because his troubles were one whit less heavy and bitter to him than a man's are to a man, but because a new and powerful interest bore them down and drove them out of his mind for the time, just as men's misfortunes are forgotten in the excitement of new enterprises. This new interest was a valued novelty in whistling, which he had just acquired from a Negro, and was suffering to practice it undisturbed. It consisted in a peculiar bird-like tune, a sort of liquid warble, produced by touching the tongue to the roof of the mouth at short intervals in the midst of the music. The reader probably remembers how to do it if he has ever been a boy. Diligence and attention soon gave him the knack of it, and he strode down the street with his mouth full of harmony and his soul full of gratitude. He felt much as an astronomer feels who has discovered a new planet. No doubt, as far as strong, deep, unalloyed pleasure is concerned, the advantage was with the boy, not the astronomer. The summer evenings were long. It was not dark yet. Presently Tom checked his whistle. A stranger was before him, a boy a shade larger than himself. A newcomer of any age or either sex was an impressive curiosity in the poor little shabby village of St. Petersburg. This boy was well dressed, too, well dressed on a weekday. This was simply astounding. His cap was a dainty thing, his closed-button blue cloth roundabout was new and natty, and so were his pantaloons. He had shoes on, and it was only Friday. He even wore a necktie, a bright bit of ribbon. He had a citified air about him that ate into Tom's vitals. The more Tom stared at the splendid marble, the higher he turned up his nose at his finery, and the shabbier and shabbier his own outfit seemed to him to grow. Neither boy spoke. If one moved, the other moved, but only sidewise in a circle. They kept face to face and eye to eye all the time. Finally Tom said, "I can lick ya. I'd like to see you try it." "Well, I can do it." "No, you can't either." "Yes, I can." "No, you can't." "I can." "You can't." "Can." "Can't." An uncomfortable pause. Then Tom said, "What's your name?" "'Tisn't any of your business, maybe." "Well, I 'low I'll make it my business." "Well, why don't you?" "If you say much, I will." "Much, much, much." "There now." "Oh, you think you're mighty smart, don't you? I could lick you with one hand tied behind me if I wanted to." "Well, why don't you do it? You say you can do it." "Well, I will if you fool with me." "Oh, yes, I've seen whole families in the same fix." "Smarty, you think you're some now, don't you?" "Oh, what a hat!" "You can lump that hat if you don't like it. I dare you to knock it off, and anybody that'll take a dare will suck eggs." "You're a liar." "You're another." "You're a fighting liar and doesn't take it up." "Ah, take a walk." "Say, if you give me much more of your sass, I'll take and bounce a rock off in your head." "Oh, of course you will." "Well, I will." "Well, why don't you do it then? What do you keep saying you will for? Why don't you do it?" "It's because you're afraid." "I ain't afraid." "You are." "I ain't." "You are." Another pause, and more eyeing and sidling around each other. Presently they were shoulder to shoulder. Tom said, "Get away from here." "Go away yourself." "I won't." "I won't either." So they stood, each with a foot placed at an angle as a brace, and both shoving with might and main and glowering at each other with hate, but neither could get an advantage. After struggling till both were hot and flushed, each relaxed his strain with watchful caution, and Tom said, "You're a coward and a pup. I'll tell my big brother on you, and he can thrash you with his little finger, and I'll make him do it too." "What do I care for your big brother? I've got a brother that's bigger than he is, and what's more, you can throw him over that fence too." Both brothers were imaginary. "That's a lie. Your saying so don't make it so." Tom drew a line in the dust with his big toe and said, "I dare you to step over that, and I'll lick you till you can't stand up. Anybody that'll take a dare will steal sheep." The new boy stepped over promptly and said, "Now you said you'd do it. Now let's see you do it. Don't you crowd me now. You better look out. Well, you said you'd do it. Why don't you do it? By jingo, for 2 cents I will do it." The new boy took 2 broad coppers out of his pocket and held them out with derision. Tom struck them to the ground. In an instant both boys were rolling and tumbling in the dirt, gripped together like cats, and for the space of a minute they tugged and tore at each other's hair and clothes, punched and scratched each other's noses, and covered themselves with dust and glory. Presently the confusion took form, and through the fog of battle Tom appeared, seated astride the new boy and pounding him with his fists. "Holler enough," said he. The boy only struggled to free himself. He was crying, mainly from rage. "Holler enough," and the pounding went on. At last the stranger got out a smothered "Nuff," and Tom let him up and said, "Now that'll learn you. Better look out who you're fooling with next time." The new boy went off, brushing the dust from his clothes, sobbing, snuffling, and occasionally looking back and shaking his head and threatening what he would do to Tom the next time he caught him out. To which Tom responded with jeers and started off in high feather, and as soon as his back was turned, the new boy snatched up a stone, threw it, and hit him between the shoulders, and then turned tail and ran like an antelope. Tom chased the traitor home, and thus found out where he lived. He then held a position at the gate for some time, daring the enemy to come outside, but the enemy only made faces at him through the window and declined. At last the enemy's mother appeared and called Tom a bad, vicious, vulgar child, and ordered him away. So he went away, but he said he loathed to lay for that boy. He got home pretty late that night, and when he climbed cautiously in at the window, he uncovered an ambuscade in the person of his aunt, and when she saw the state his clothes were in, her resolution to turn his Saturday holiday into captivity at hard labor became adamantine in its firmness. To catch Tom in his deceptions, Aunt Polly uses her own deceptive methods. In doing so, she fails to be a good example for Tom, and anyway, he proves to be the more skillful deceiver. Tom and the other boys fighting is shown as ridiculous, with no other point but the assertion of dominance. Yet their conflict is not so different between those of adults, whose competitive behaviors are typically less physically violent but are still driven by the same desires to fit in and also rise above one another. Once again, Aunt Polly uses deviousness to catch deviousness. Tom is often punished for his deviousness, but Aunt Polly's tactics show that it is a useful skill in the adult world. The theme is boyhood rebellion and growing up. This scene establishes the relationship between Tom and his half-brother Sid, a boy who is unlike Tom as anyone can possibly be. Sid is the insipid good boy who minds all of his elders and does everything expected of him. Sid delights in being a tattletale, in being a prig, and in getting Tom into trouble. Later, the scene involves Tom's asserting his own turf in the presence of a newcomer, Alfred Temple. The darings and the verbal sparrings lead to a fistfight that Tom wins. Tom is further contrasted to the well-dressed new boy because Tom fights fair, while the new boy, when Tom turns his back, cowardly throws a stone and hits Tom. Polly asked him questions that were full of guile and very deep, for she wanted to trap him into damaging revealments. Like many other simple-hearted souls, it was her pet vanity to believe she was endowed with a talent for dark and mysterious diplomacy, and she loved to contemplate her most transparent devices as marvels of low cunning. Here we can infer that Aunt Polly's faith in her own ingenuity, the very thing that keeps Tom going, is her undoing. In short, this first chapter firmly establishes Tom's relationship with the world. He's a child doing things that a child would do. He lives in a slave state. He has no parents but has a loving parent figure. He is mischievous but good-natured.